They say the devil doesn't come to you dressed in a red cape with pointy horns. No, the devil comes to your front door on a Sunday afternoon, wearing a modest floral sundress, carrying a bland store-bought potato salad, and looking you right in the eye as she calls you Mama. My name is Fiona. I'm 58 years old, and for the last 30 years I've broken my back, blistered my hands, and sacrificed my sleep to build Fiona's Southern Table, a catering business that grew from a tiny, cramped kitchen in a rented duplex to the most sought-after event catering service in our part of Georgia. I cater weddings, corporate galas, and charity balls for the kind of people who don't ask how much something costs. I earned every single dime, every silver hair on my head, and the 5-bedroom brick estate I now call home. And for a long time I thought I had everything a woman my age could pray for. I had a thriving business. I had my son Marcus, a 32-year-old decorated police officer who still hugged his mother in public. And I had Julian. Julian and I had been married for almost 4 decades. When we met, he was a handsome, fast-talking man with a smile that could melt butter. As the years went by, while I was elbow-deep in flour and accounting books, Julian kept his hands clean. He managed a small insurance branch, but his real full-time job was maintaining his looks. At 60, Julian still had a full head of salt and pepper hair, kept his waistline trim, and dressed like he was always about to step onto a golf course. I never minded being the primary breadwinner. I loved him. I thought we were a team. I took care of the empire. He took care of the charm. Then there was Allison. Marcus married Allison 2 years ago. She was 26, fair-skinned, with big doe eyes and a voice so soft you had to lean in to hear her. On paper, she was a lovely girl. She worked part-time as a receptionist at a dental clinic and spent the rest of her time decorating the modest townhouse Marcus had bought for them. But as a woman who had spent her life reading people, my spirit never fully settled with her. It was the little things, the microaggressions wrapped in sweet Southern drawls. Take that particular Sunday, for example. The Sunday before my whole life cracked open. I was in my kitchen, finishing up a massive spread. I had a honey-glazed ham in the oven, a pot of collard greens simmering with smoked turkey necks, and my signature peach cobbler resting on the counter. The house smelled like love and hard work. The front door chimed, and I heard Marcus's booming laugh echo in the foyer. I wiped my hands on my apron and walked out to greet them. Marcus lifted me off my feet with a bear hug, his police badge pressing against my shoulder. "Smells like heaven in here, Ma," he said, kissing my cheek. Right behind him was Allison, holding a plastic container from the local deli. "Hi, Mama Fiona," she murmured, offering that practiced, thin-lipped smile. "I brought potato salad. I know you usually slave away over the hot stove all morning, so I wanted to save you some trouble. At your age, you really shouldn't be on your feet so much." There it was, the subtle dig. At your age, slave away. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said smoothly, taking the cold plastic container. "But you know my boys prefer their potatoes made from scratch. I'll just put this in the fridge for leftovers." Julian walked down the sweeping mahogany staircase, adjusting the cuffs of his crisp linen shirt. He beamed when he saw Allison. "Not Marcus, Allison. There's my favorite daughter-in-law," Julian said, walking past our son to give Allison an embrace that lasted just a second too long. His hands lingered on her waist before he stepped back. "Allison, you look radiant. That color really brings out your eyes." "Thank you, Julian," she giggled, blushing and looking down at her shoes. Marcus barely noticed. "Hey, I told you you looked nice in the car," Marcus protested playfully, oblivious to the strange current shifting in the room. My son, God bless him, had a heart of gold but the observational skills of a rock when it came to the people he loved. He saw the best in everyone, especially his wife and his father. Throughout dinner, the dynamic was off. It had been off for months, but I had been too busy managing a 300-person wedding weekend to really analyze it. I watched them from the head of the table. Julian laughed at all of Allison's mundane stories about the dental clinic. He poured her wine before he poured mine. When Allison accidentally dropped her napkin, Julian dove under the table to get it for her before Marcus even registered it had fallen. "So, Fiona," Allison chirped, delicately cutting a piece of ham. "Are you taking any time off soon? Julian was telling me how stressful the catering business has been for you lately. He worries about your blood pressure." I paused, my fork hovering over my plate. I looked at Julian, who suddenly seemed very interested in his collard greens. I didn't have blood pressure issues. "My health is perfectly fine, Allison," I said, keeping my tone light but firm. The business is booming. In fact, we just secured the catering contract for the mayor's annual gala. Oh, wow, Allison said, her eyes widening. That must bring in a lot of money. It brings in a lot of hard work, I corrected her. Well, you can't take it with you, Julian chimed in, offering a jovial chuckle that didn't reach his eyes. Maybe it's time you start thinking about slowing down, Julie. Let the younger generation step up. Enjoy the fruits of our labor. Our labor. That phrase stuck in my throat like a dry biscuit. Julian hadn't lifted a finger for Fiona's southern table in 30 years. I have plenty of fuel left in the tank, Julian, I said softly, looking dead at him. The table went quiet. Marcus cleared his throat and changed the subject to the local football team, completely missing the silent war being waged across the fine china. I sat back, sipping my sweet tea. Something was festering in my home. I could smell it, and it wasn't the food. 2 days later, the catering kitchen was closed for deep cleaning, so I was working from my home office. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The house was dead quiet. Julian was supposedly at his insurance office downtown. I needed to find an old tax document from 3 years ago. My main laptop was running an update, so I walked over to the mahogany bookshelf and grabbed Julian's old iPad. We shared a passcode for all our home devices, something we set up decades ago when trust was just an assumed default. I unlocked the screen and opened the Files app, typing in the year to search for the tax return. Instead, a different document popped up at the top of the recent files list. It was a PDF titled FST_HELOC_application_draft.pdf. FST, Fiona's Southern Table. HELOC, Home Equity Line of Credit. I frowned, tapping the file. The screen loaded, displaying a formal banking application from a private lending firm in Atlanta. My eyes scanned the dense text. Someone was applying for a $750,000 line of credit, using the commercial property of my catering kitchen in this very house as collateral. My breath hitched. I scrolled down frantically to the final page. There on the borrower's line was Julian's name, and right beneath it was my name, Fiona Roberts. Next to my name was an electronic signature. I stared at the screen, the silence in the room suddenly deafening. I never signed this. I never discussed a loan with Julian. The business had zero debt. We owned the house free and clear. Why on earth would Julian be trying to secretly mortgage my life's work? My first instinct was to call him, to scream, to ask him if he had lost his damn mind. My finger hovered over his contact name on my phone. But 30 years in business had taught me one crucial rule. Never confront an enemy when you don't know the size of their army. I forced my heart to slow down. I breathed in through my nose and out through my mouth. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. The loving wife stepped aside, and the CEO took the wheel. I sat down at the heavy oak desk and began to dig. If he had this document saved on his iCloud, what else was he hiding? I opened his email app. Nothing suspicious in the main inbox. I checked the deleted folder. Empty. I opened his iMessage. Just texts from Marcus, me, and guys from his golf club. He was clean. Too clean. A man who forged his wife's signature for $750,000 doesn't have an empty digital footprint unless he's actively scrubbing it. Then I noticed an unfamiliar app icon buried in a folder labeled Utilities. It was a secure messaging app. I tapped it. It required a separate PIN. I tried his birth year. Error. Our anniversary. Error. Marcus's birthday. Error. I stopped. I thought back to Sunday dinner. I thought about the way his hands lingered on her waist. The way they looked at each other when they thought I was focused on the food. With a trembling hand, I typed in Allison's birth date. Access granted. My stomach dropped to the floor. There was only one chat thread in the app, saved under the initial A. I started scrolling. The messages weren't just flirty, they were a roadmap of betrayal. A. Did you get the paperwork sorted with the broker? The guy I told you about needs the first installment by the end of the month. Julian. I'm on it, baby. Just had to finalize the e-signature. She doesn't suspect a thing. She's too busy baking pies. A. Good. I'm so sick of this townhouse. And I'm sick of playing house with Marcus. He's so boring, Julian, not like you. Julian. Just be patient, beautiful. Once the funds clear, we transfer them to the offshore LLC. Then we let the bank foreclose on the catering kitchen. She'll be bankrupt, and we'll be free. A. I can't wait. See you Thursday? She has that tasting in Savannah, right? Julian. Yes. Her flight leaves at 8 a.m. Come over at 10. Park in the garage so the neighbors don't see. I dropped the iPad onto the desk. It landed with a heavy thud. I physically couldn't breathe. The room spun. I had to grip the edge of the desk to keep from falling out of the chair. My husband of nearly 40 years, my sweet, beautiful daughter-in-law. They weren't just sleeping together. They were financially assassinating me. They were using my money, my sweat, my blood, to fund a getaway life together. And Marcus, my poor, devoted Marcus. They were treating my son like a placeholder, a convenient cover story while they plotted to ruin his mother and steal his inheritance. A wave of nausea hit me so hard I had to run to the master bathroom. I dry heaved over the porcelain sink, splashing cold water on my face until my reflection in the mirror stopped shaking. I looked at myself. I saw the wrinkles around my eyes, earned from years of smiling through exhausting 18-hour workdays. I saw the dark skin that my husband used to say looked like flawless mahogany. "You stupid, stupid woman," I whispered to my reflection. I allowed myself exactly 5 minutes to cry. 5 minutes to mourn the death of my marriage, the death of the family I thought I had built. Hot, bitter tears streamed down my face, washing away the illusion of my perfect life. When the 5 minutes were up, I wiped my face with a monogrammed towel. The sadness was gone. What replaced it was something cold, dark, and terrifyingly calm. Julian wanted to steal from me. Allison thought she could play me for a fool in my own house. All right, I thought. Let's play. I walked back to the study. I took out my phone and took clear, high-resolution photographs of every single message on that iPad, every page of the forged loan document. I emailed them to a secure, brand-new email address I created on the spot. Then I carefully closed the apps, wiped the iPad screen clean of my fingerprints, and placed it exactly where I found it on the bookshelf. Thursday was in 2 days. They thought I was going to Savannah. I needed to give them enough rope to hang themselves, and I needed undeniable, indisputable proof. On Wednesday morning, I drove to an electronics store 2 towns over. I paid cash for a high-end voice-activated micro-audio recorder, the kind private investigators use. It was no bigger than a pack of gum. When I got home, Julian's Lexus was parked in the driveway. I had bought him that car for his 60th birthday. Paid in full. I unlocked the car, slipped into the passenger seat, and reached underneath. I found a small tear in the fabric under the seat frame and tucked the recorder deep inside, securing it with a piece of heavy-duty tape. It was invisible, but perfectly positioned to pick up every whisper, every breath in that car. Thursday morning arrived. I packed a small overnight bag, kissed Julian on the cheek, and told him I loved him. "Have a safe flight, Julie," he said, adjusting his tie in the hallway mirror. He looked handsome. He smelled like expensive cologne. "Don't work too hard. Call me when you land." "I will," I promised, offering him a warm, steady smile. I didn't go to the airport. I drove my SUV to a sprawling shopping mall on the other side of Atlanta. I parked in the massive, anonymous garage, checked into a nearby luxury hotel under my maiden name, and waited. The waiting was a unique kind of torture. I sat on the edge of the pristine hotel bed, staring at the wall, imagining Allison pulling her cheap little sedan into my garage. I imagined her walking through my front door, up my staircase, and into the bed I had shared with that man for decades. I felt a phantom pain in my chest, a tight, squeezing sensation that made it hard to swallow, but I forced myself to sit still, to let the trap snap shut. I stayed in that hotel room all day, working on my laptop, meticulously reviewing every financial asset, every bank account, every piece of property I owned. I compiled a list. If this was going to be a war, I needed to know exactly where my troops were stationed. I returned home late Friday afternoon. Julian was sitting in the living room, watching a golf tournament, nursing a glass of bourbon. "Hey, baby," he said, getting up to kiss my forehead. "How was Savannah?" "Productive," I said smoothly. "Very productive." That night, after Julian had taken his sleeping pill and was snoring loudly in our bed, I slipped out of the room. I went down to the garage, opened the passenger door of the Lexus, and retrieved the little black recorder. I took it into my home office, locked the door, and plugged it into my laptop. Put on my noise-canceling headphones. There were several audio files. Most of them were just Julian driving, listening to sports radio, ordering at a drive-thru. Then I clicked on a file time-stamped Thursday, 11:30 a.m. The audio started with the sound of the car doors unlocking and opening. Oh my God, finally. Allison's voice filtered through my headphones. It wasn't the sweet, whispery tone she used around me. It was husky, impatient, and arrogant. "I told you I'd pick you up," Julian replied. The engine roared to life. "Did Marcus suspect anything when you left?" "Marcus?" Allison laughed, a sharp, cruel sound. "Please, I told him I was going to a bridal shower for a friend from the clinic. The idiot actually gave me his credit card to buy a gift. He's so clueless, Julian. Sometimes I look at him and wonder how he's even related to you." "He gets his brains from his mother's side," Julian chuckled. I closed my eyes. The disrespect sliced through me like a razor blade. It was one thing to betray me. It was another to mock my child. "Speaking of the old ball and chain," Allison continued over the sound of the car driving, "when is the loan money hitting the account? The broker is getting anxious." "Next week," Julian promised. I had to forge a secondary verification document she supposedly missed, but it went through. $750,000, Allison. Tax-free, untraceable once it hits the Caymans. "And then what?" she asked, her voice dropping into a sultry purr. I heard the rustling of fabric, the unmistakable sound of them getting closer in the front seat of the car I bought. "And then," Julian said, his breathing getting heavier, "the bank realizes Fiona hasn't made a single payment. They audit the catering company. They seize the house. She'll be left with absolutely nothing. And by the time she figures out it was me, we'll be drinking margaritas on a beach in Belize." "I can't wait to see the look on her arrogant face," Allison sneered. "She walks around that house like she's some kind of queen just because she can fry a chicken. She treats me like a child." "She is tired, baby. Old and tired," Julian murmured. "Not like you. You're my future." The audio devolved into sounds I will not dignify with a description. Disgusting, wet, animalistic sounds of two traitors desecrating everything I held sacred. I pulled the headphones off and threw them onto the desk. I didn't cry this time. There were no tears left. The woman who loved Julian Roberts died in that office at 2 o'clock in the morning. They thought I was just an old woman who knew how to fry a chicken. They thought I was a naive workhorse they could bleed dry and put out to pasture. They underestimated my intelligence. They underestimated my ruthlessness. And most importantly, they underestimated the lengths a mother will go to protect her son. Julian wanted to steal my empire? Allison wanted to play the queen? I sat in the dark, the glow of the laptop illuminating my face. I opened my contacts and found the number for Mr. Sterling, the most vicious, shark-toothed corporate attorney in the state of Georgia. I wasn't going to just divorce Julian. I wasn't going to just expose Allison to Marcus. That was too easy. That was too kind. I was going to let them think their plan was working. I was going to let them reach the finish line, taste the victory, and right when they thought they had won, I was going to burn their entire world to the ground and dance on the ashes. The facade was perfect, but my revenge was going to be a masterpiece. When you build a house brick by brick with your own bare hands, you know exactly where the load-bearing walls are. You know which beams hold the roof up, and you know exactly which pillars to kick out if you want the whole thing to come crashing down. On Monday morning, I didn't go to the commercial kitchen. I let my sous chef handle the prep for a midweek corporate luncheon. Instead, I put on my best-tailored navy suit, pinned my hair up tight, and drove to the sleek glass-paneled high-rise in downtown Atlanta. Arthur Sterling's office was on the 42nd floor. Arthur was a silver-haired, ruthlessly efficient corporate attorney who charged $700 an hour. He had helped me incorporate Fiona's Southern Table 20 years ago. He knew my business inside and out, and more importantly, he knew me. I walked into his office, bypassing the pleasantries. I dropped a thick manila folder onto his pristine glass desk. Inside were the printed screenshots of the forged home equity line of credit, the offshore LLC paperwork I had found on Julian's iPad, and a transcript of the audio recording from the Lexus. Arthur adjusted his reading glasses and spent 10 silent minutes going through the file. The only sound in the room was the heavy ticking of his antique grandfather clock and the faint hum of the city traffic far below. Finally, he took his glasses off and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked at me, his expression grave. "Fiona," he started, his voice a low gravel. "I am profoundly sorry. Julian has lost his mind. Forging your signature on a commercial loan of this magnitude, this isn't just grounds for a brutal divorce. This is federal wire fraud. We can go to the authorities right now. We can have him arrested before dinner." No, I said instantly. My voice was calm, but it held the weight of a judge passing a sentence. If I call the police now, Julian gets arrested, yes, but the scandal hits the local news. My catering business gets dragged into a criminal investigation. My clients, the mayor, the country clubs, the charity boards, they don't like messy headlines. They'll pull their contracts. He ruins my legacy. Arthur leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. So what exactly are you asking me to do? I'm asking you to let them dig the grave, I said, leaning forward. Julian and Allison think they are setting up a trap for me. I want to let them walk right into it. But before they pull the trigger, I need you to move the target. Arthur's eyes narrowed, a spark of professional intrigue lighting up his face. Go on. Fiona's Southern Table LLC owns the commercial building, the delivery vans, and the industrial equipment, I explained. That's what Julian is trying to mortgage. But the physical equipment isn't what makes the money. What makes the money is my name, the brand, the proprietary recipes, the exclusive vendor contracts. A slow, wolfish smile spread across Arthur's face. Intellectual property. Exactly, I nodded. I want to quietly establish a new, separate holding company, a blind trust that Julian has no legal access to. I want to transfer the rights to the name Fiona's Southern Table, every single recipe, and every client contract out of the original LLC and into the trust. I want the original LLC to become a hollow shell. Let Julian and Allison take out their massive loan against the building. By the time the bank hands them the money, the company they mortgaged will be completely worthless. Arthur chuckled, shaking his head in admiration. Fiona, you are a terrifying woman. I am a mother protecting her son's inheritance, I corrected him coldly. Julian wants to leave me with nothing? Fine. Let him steal an empty box. Now how long will the transfer take? To do it quietly without triggering alerts to any joint accounts? Give me 2 weeks, Arthur said, pulling out a legal pad. But you have to keep Julian distracted. If he senses anything is wrong, if he tries to push the loan through early, it all falls apart. Don't worry about Julian, I said, standing up and smoothing my skirt. I know exactly how to keep my husband occupied. I'm going to give him exactly what he wants. The hardest part of a war isn't the fighting. It's the acting. It's smiling at the enemy while you load the gun under the table. That Friday evening, I hosted our usual family dinner, but I made sure the stage was set properly. I didn't wear my usual crisp blouses. I wore an oversized, faded cardigan. I used a damp makeup sponge to blot out my concealer, letting the dark circles under my eyes show prominently. I even added a touch of pale powder to my cheeks to wash out my complexion. When I brought the roasted chicken and potatoes to the dining table, I intentionally let my hands tremble, causing the serving spoon to clatter loudly against the porcelain bowl. Marcus was immediately out of his chair. "Ma, whoa, let me get that," he said, taking the heavy dish from my hands. He looked at me, his brow furrowed with genuine concern. "You look exhausted. Are you feeling okay?" I sighed, a long, ragged sound, and sank heavily into my chair at the head of the table. "I'm just tired, Marcus. I think the Savannah trip took more out of me than I expected." Julian, sitting to my right, exchanged a lightning-fast, subtle glance with Allison across the table. I saw it. It was the look of two predators realizing the gazelle had a limp. "I've been telling you, Julie," Julian said, his voice dripping with faux concern. He reached over and patted my hand. "You push yourself too hard. You aren't 35 anymore. Running the kitchen, handling the payroll, dealing with the vendors. It's too much for one person." "You know," Allison chimed in, her voice soft and sweet like poisoned honey. "At the clinic, we see so many older women who suffer stress-induced heart issues because they refuse to slow down. We just want you to be healthy, Mama Fiona." I looked down at my plate, taking a deep, shaky breath, playing the role of the defeated, weary matriarch to perfection. "You might be right," I murmured, my voice barely above a whisper. The dining room went dead silent. Marcus stopped chewing. Julian's hand froze on his wine glass. For 30 years, I had never admitted defeat. I had never stepped back. "I think," I continued, looking up at Julian with wide, vulnerable eyes, "I need to take a leave of absence from the administrative side of the business. The cooking I can handle, but the finances, the bank meetings, the tax prep, it's giving me migraines." Julian practically vibrated with suppressed excitement. He leaned in, trying to keep his face completely neutral. "What are you suggesting, sweetheart?" "I'm suggesting I hand over the financial management to you, Julian," I said, delivering the fatal bait. "You have the business degree. You know numbers. If you could step in as the chief financial officer for the LLC, handle the banking and the restructuring, it would take a massive weight off my shoulders." Julian let out a heavy sigh, acting as though I had just asked him to carry a boulder up a hill. "Well, my insurance branch keeps me busy, Julie. But for you? For your health? Of course I'll step in. I'll take over the company checkbooks and deal with the bank starting Monday." "Thank you," I said, reaching out to squeeze his hand. His palm was slightly sweaty. "And Allison?" Allison blinked, startled. "Yes?" "Julian can't do all the paperwork alone," I said gently. "Since you only work part-time at the clinic, would you mind helping him out? Organizing the files, handling the administrative duties for the company transition. I'd be willing to pay you a consulting fee." Allison's eyes widened. She looked at Julian, her lips parting in a silent gasp of victory. They didn't even have to fight me for the keys to the kingdom. I was handing them over on a silver platter. "I would be honored, Mama Fiona," Allison said earnestly, pressing a hand to her chest. "Whatever the family needs." "That settles it," Marcus smiled, looking relieved. "Ma, you just focus on resting and baking. Dad and Allison have got the boring stuff handled." "Yes," I agreed, taking a sip of my water to hide the cold, dead smile threatening to break across my face. "They have it completely handled." I spent the rest of the evening watching them. They were practically glowing. They thought they had outsmarted me. They thought my fatigue was real. They didn't realize that a lioness doesn't crouch down because she's tired. She crouches down right before she pounces. The beautiful thing about greedy people is that they always get sloppy. When you think you're the smartest person in the room, you stop checking your blind spots. A week after I handed Julian the financial reins, I was back in Arthur Sterling's office. The new blind trust had been legally established. Every recipe, from the buttermilk biscuits to the signature honey glaze, was now legally owned by an entity entirely separate from Julian. But Arthur had something else for me. Something that proved Julian wasn't just a traitor. He was a fool. Arthur slid a sleek black folder across the desk. "My private investigator dug into the offshore LLC that Julian and your daughter-in-law set up to receive the loan funds." I opened the folder. Inside were banking profiles and registration documents for a company based in the Cayman Islands. "I already know about this, Arthur. This is where they plan to stash the $750,000. "Look closer at the authorized signatories, Fiona," Arthur instructed. I scanned the page. Julian's name wasn't on it. Neither was Allison's. There was only one name listed as the sole managing director of the offshore account: Devin Vance. I frowned, the name ringing a faint, distant bell. "Who is Devin Vance?" Arthur pulled up a photograph on his iPad and turned it toward me. It was a mugshot of a handsome, rough-looking young man with dreadlocks and a smirk. "Devin Vance is a 30-year-old personal trainer. He has 2 minor convictions for wire fraud and passing bad checks. More importantly, Devin Vance is Allison's ex-boyfriend. They dated for 3 years before she met your son." The air in the room suddenly felt very thin. I stared at the mugshot, my mind working at lightning speed, connecting the dots. "Julian doesn't know about this," I whispered, the realization washing over me. "Julian thinks the money is going into a joint account that he and Allison control," Arthur confirmed. "He's doing all the heavy lifting. He's committing the felony forgery. He's taking all the legal risk. But the routing numbers he submitted to the bank? They go straight to an account controlled entirely by Devin Vance." I burst out laughing. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a dark, dry, bitter sound that echoed off the glass walls of the office. Julian, my arrogant, vain husband, thought he was the mastermind. He thought he was seducing a naive 26-year-old girl and using her to steal my fortune. But Allison was playing a completely different game. She was using Julian's access to my business to secure the loan, but she had zero intention of running away to Belize with a 60-year-old man. The moment that money cleared, Allison and Devin were going to vanish, leaving Julian holding the bag for $750,000 in fraudulent debt. "She is double-crossing him," I said, shaking my head. I almost felt a twinge of pity for Julian. Almost. "There's no honor among thieves, Fiona," Arthur said dryly. "If we stop the loan now, Julian just gets a slap on the wrist for attempted fraud. But if we let the loan go through, if we let it go through, Allison steals the money from Julian. I finished the thought. Julian defaults on the loan. The bank tries to seize Fiona's Southern table, only to find out the LLC has no assets and no brand value. The bank sues Julian personally for the missing funds. And Julian goes to federal prison completely broke, Arthur concluded, while Allison and her ex-boyfriend skip town. I closed the black folder. I thought about Marcus. My son was sleeping next to a woman who was actively plotting to destroy his father and his inheritance so she could run off with a convicted fraudster. I couldn't just let Allison run away with my money. She needed to be destroyed just as thoroughly as Julian. They both needed to burn. "Arthur," I said, tapping my manicured fingernails against the glass desk, "does your investigator know where Devin Vance lives?" "He does." "Good," I smiled, the final piece of the puzzle locking into place. "Keep an eye on him, because when the time is right, I'm going to make sure the police know exactly where to find him. But first, I need to deal with my family. It's time to break my son's heart so I can save his life." I stood up, leaving the high-rise and stepping out into the warm Atlanta sun. The strategic retreat was over. My assets were secured. The enemy was surrounded, and they didn't even know it. Thanksgiving was exactly 3 weeks away. It was time to plan the menu. And this year, I was serving the truth, cold and ungarnished. There is a specific kind of audacity required to carry another man's child while sleeping in your husband's bed. But to carry your father-in-law's child? That requires a level of sociopathy that even I hadn't anticipated. It started on a Tuesday evening in early November. Julian and I were sitting in the living room. I was reviewing some catering menus, playing the part of the exhausted, semi-retired wife, while Julian was aggressively typing on his laptop, no doubt finalizing the fraudulent loan documents for the bank. The front door opened, and Marcus walked in, holding Allison's hand. He was beaming. I hadn't seen my son smile like that since the day he graduated from the police academy. His eyes were shining, and his chest was puffed out with a pride so pure it made my stomach physically ache. "Ma, Dad," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "We have some news." Allison stepped forward, placing a perfectly manicured hand over her flat stomach. She gave us a teary, radiant smile. "I'm pregnant. You're going to be grandparents." Julian dropped his phone. It hit the hardwood floor with a sharp crack. For a split second, the mask slipped. I saw the absolute sheer panic in my husband's eyes. He stared at Allison's stomach as if she had just announced she was carrying a live grenade. But Allison didn't look panicked at all. She looked directly at Julian, her doe eyes wide and innocent, holding a silent, terrifying warning. "Oh, my Lord!" I gasped, standing up and pressing my hands to my mouth. I rushed forward and wrapped Marcus in a tight hug. "A baby. My beautiful boy is going to be a father." "I can't believe it, Ma," Marcus whispered into my hair. "I'm so happy." I hugged Allison next. She felt stiff in my arms. "Congratulations, sweetheart," I whispered in her ear. "Thank you, Mama Fiona," she replied sweetly. "We're just so blessed. Actually, Marcus and I were talking. With the baby coming, I really need to feel secure. Marcus has agreed to finally add my name to the deed of the townhouse. You know, to protect our growing family." I pulled back, keeping my smile firmly pinned to my face. Of course, the townhouse was bought by Marcus before the marriage. It was legally his separate property. But if he added her to the deed, she owned half of the equity. Allison was cashing out every asset she could before she ran off with Devin Vance. "That makes perfect sense," I said smoothly. I looked over at Julian, who was still standing completely frozen by the sofa. "Julian, aren't you going to congratulate them?" Julian swallowed hard, his face a pale, pasty gray. "Congratulations, son. Allison, this is unexpected news." The next morning, I was sitting in Arthur Sterling's office. I didn't bother with small talk. "She's claiming she's pregnant," I said, dropping my purse on the glass desk. "And she's using it to force Marcus into signing over half his house. I need to know if the baby is his or if it's the ex-boyfriend's." Arthur picked up his desk phone, dialed his private investigator, and put him on speaker. "Fiona needs an update on the daughter-in-law," Arthur instructed. The investigator's voice crackled through the speaker. "Way ahead of you. I've been tracking her movements. 2 weeks ago, Allison visited a boutique prenatal clinic in Buckhead. She didn't just get an ultrasound. She paid $3,000 in cash for a non-invasive prenatal paternity test. They draw the mother's blood and match the fetal DNA against a swab from the potential father. Did she swab Devin Vance? I asked, my heart pounding against my ribs. No, the investigator said dryly, but I did manage to intercept the digital results sent to her burner email. Probability of paternity for Marcus Roberts is 0%. I closed my eyes. So it's Devin's. No, ma'am, the PI corrected. The lab report didn't test Devin Vance. The secondary swab submitted was labeled J. Roberts. The probability of paternity for Julian Roberts is 99.9%. The silence in the office was absolute. Arthur Sterling, a man who had seen decades of corporate backstabbing and nasty divorces, actually looked mildly horrified. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. The absolute depravity of it washed over me, crystallizing my resolve into something harder than diamonds. Julian wasn't just stealing my money. He had created a bastard child with my son's wife, a child they were going to let my son raise, love, and pay for, while they bled us dry from the shadows. Arthur, I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. Draft the divorce papers. Get the business transition documents finalized. We are moving up the timeline. Understood, Arthur said quietly. When do you want to pull the trigger? Thanksgiving, I replied, standing up. I'm going to give them a holiday they will never, ever forget. If you want to trap a rat, you don't chase it with a broom. You build a comfortable box, put the finest cheese inside, and wait for it to walk in on its own. I insisted on hosting Thanksgiving dinner at my house. I called Allison's parents, Robert and Diane Washington, and invited them. The Washingtons were pretentious, status-obsessed people who loved to brag about their daughter marrying into the wealthy Roberts family. I also invited Pastor Miller from our church, a man Julian constantly tried to impress to maintain his image as a pillar of the community. Then I called a high-end audiovisual company. Since my health has been failing, and with the new grandbaby on the way, we're going to be spending a lot more time at home, I told Julian over breakfast a week before the holiday. I hired a crew to install a state-of-the-art smart home system. It has a drop-down 4K projector for the living room, surround sound, and security cameras for the nursery and the front doors. Julian, who was currently drowning in the stress of forging bank documents while dealing with his pregnant mistress/daughter-in-law, barely looked up from his coffee. Whatever you want, Julie, if it makes you comfortable. The tech crew arrived and wired the house, but they didn't just install a projector. For an extra $5,000 in cash, the lead technician integrated a hidden secure drive into the media system, controlled entirely by an app on my phone. Whatever I queued up on that app would instantly override the television, the projector, and the surround sound speakers. I spent the night before Thanksgiving in my home office, editing the audio and video files. I took the dash cam footage from the Lexus, the crystal clear audio of Julian and Allison mocking Marcus, discussing the fraud, and the undeniable graphic sounds of their affair. I spliced it together with the photograph of the DNA paternity test results. I saved the file under the name, The Miracle Child. Thanksgiving Day arrived, unseasonably warm and bright. The house smelled of roasted turkey, sage dressing, candied yams, and fresh-baked yeast rolls. The dining room table was set with my best crystal and gold-rimmed china. I sat at the head of the table, wearing a stunning emerald green dress, my hair perfectly styled. I didn't look like a tired, sick old woman anymore. I looked like a queen holding court. To my right sat Julian, sweating slightly through his expensive button-down shirt. To my left was Marcus, holding Allison's hand. Allison wore a tight maternity dress that emphasized a bump that was barely there, glowing with the smug satisfaction of a woman who thought she had won the lottery. Across from them sat Allison's parents, Diane and Robert, who were busy kissing up to Pastor Miller. "Fiona, everything is just exquisite," Diane Washington gushed, taking a sip of her wine. "We are just so blessed. A new baby coming, Marcus doing so well at the precinct, and Julian stepping up to run the catering business so you can finally rest. God is good." "God is very intentional, Diane," I smiled, slicing into my turkey. "Everything comes to the light eventually." Julian cleared his throat nervously. "Well, let's just enjoy the food." Halfway through dinner, right before the dessert course, Allison tapped her spoon against her crystal water glass. The table fell silent. She stood up, resting both hands on her stomach, looking around with tear-filled eyes. "I just wanted to make a toast. Allison said, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. To family. This has been such an incredible year, and we wanted to share a special blessing with all of you today. Yesterday, Marcus and I went to the clinic and we got our first 3D ultrasound. We want to show it to you. Oh, how wonderful! Pastor Miller clapped his hands. Ma, can we use the new projector in the living room? Marcus asked eagerly, pulling out his phone. Allison sent me the video. Actually, I said, dabbing my mouth with a linen napkin. I have a surprise. Allison sent me the video this morning. I already queued it up on the smart system. Why don't we all move to the living room, and I'll play it on the big screen with the surround sound? You're the best, Ma, Marcus beamed, helping his wife out of her chair. We moved to the spacious living room. The Washingtons took the plush leather sofa, the pastor sat in the armchair, and Marcus stood with his arm proudly wrapped around Allison's waist. Julian stood near the back by the hallway, looking antsy. I stood by the fireplace, holding my phone. All right, I said, my voice cutting through the excited chatter. Let's look at the future of this family. I pressed play on my phone. The heavy motorized screen dropped down from the ceiling. The room darkened. For the first 5 seconds, it was the black and white static of an ultrasound. The rhythmic thump, thump, thump of a fetal heartbeat echoed through the massive surround sound speakers. Diane Washington awed. Marcus smiled so hard tears pricked his eyes. And then the screen cut to black. The heartbeat stopped. Suddenly, the crystal-clear audio of Allison's voice blasted through the room, loud and unmistakable. I'm so sick of playing house with Marcus. He's so boring, Julian, not like you. The smile on Marcus's face vanished. The entire room froze. Then came Julian's voice, echoing off the high ceilings. He gets his brains from his mother's side. Just be patient, beautiful. Once the funds clear, we transfer them to the offshore LLC. Then we let the bank foreclose on the catering kitchen. She'll be bankrupt, and we'll be free. What is this? Robert Washington demanded, standing up. Is this some kind of joke? Turn it off, Julian bellowed, his face turning an apocalyptic shade of purple. He lunged for the wall switch, but I had disabled the manual controls from my phone. The audio continued. It didn't spare them. The speakers blasted the wet, heavy sounds of their physical affair in the front seat of the Lexus. Allison's moans mixed with Julian's grunts. It was vile. It was undeniable. Diane Washington let out a horrified shriek and covered her face. Pastor Miller dropped his Bible onto the floor, staring at the screen in pure, unadulterated shock. Julian? Allison screamed over the audio, her facade completely shattering. Turn it off! But the screen lit up again. It wasn't an ultrasound. It was the high-resolution photograph of the DNA paternity test. The text was magnified to be 10 feet tall. Probability of paternity, Julian Roberts, 99.9%. I pressed pause. The silence that followed was heavier than a tombstone. I looked at Marcus, my strong, brave son. He wasn't crying. His police training had kicked in. His face was a mask of cold, hard stone. He slowly removed his arm from Allison's waist and took 3 steps back from her, as if she were a corpse that had suddenly sat up. Marcus, baby, please, Allison sobbed, reaching out for him. It's fake. Fiona faked it. She hates me. Marcus didn't look at her. He looked at Julian. Julian was backing away toward the front door, his hands raised in surrender. Son, listen to me. She seduced me. I made a mistake, but I'm your father. Shut your mouth, Marcus said. His voice wasn't a yell. It was a low, lethal whisper that carried across the room. He turned to Allison, holding out his hand. Give me the keys to my house. Marcus, please, she wailed, tears streaming down her perfectly contoured face. The keys, Allison. Now, Marcus commanded, stepping into her space with a terrifying stillness. Or I will physically remove you from this property and have you arrested for trespassing. Shaking violently, Allison dug into her designer purse, bought with my money, and dropped the keys into his palm. Marcus turned to the Washingtons, who were standing huddled together, looking like they wanted the floor to swallow them whole. Take your daughter, Marcus told them, his voice dead. Get her things out of my house by tomorrow morning. If she is on my property when I get home, I will call my precinct. Robert Washington grabbed Allison by the arm, roughly yanking her toward the door. Diane followed, sobbing into her hands. They didn't even look back. The embarrassment of their golden child being exposed as an incestuous gold digger in front of the pastor was too much to bear. The front door slammed shut. It was just me, Julian, Marcus, and the pastor. Julian looked at me. His arrogant posture was gone. He looked small, old, and pathetic. "Julie," he pleaded, tears welling in his eyes. "Julie, 40 years. You know I love you. Please." I walked over to the mahogany side table, picked up the manila folder Arthur Sterling had given me, and tossed it so it slid across the hardwood floor, stopping right at Julian's Italian leather shoes. "Those are the divorce papers, Julian," I said, my voice smooth and untouched by the chaos. "And a formal notice of eviction. My name is the only one on the deed to this house. You have exactly 30 minutes to pack a bag and get out." "You can't do this to me," Julian cried, his voice cracking. "I'm your husband." "Not anymore," I said. I turned my back on him and walked over to my son. I wrapped my arms around Marcus's broad shoulders. For a moment he stood rigid, and then he broke. He buried his face in my neck, and his shoulders shook with silent, agonizing sobs. I held my boy, rubbing his back, staring at Julian over Marcus's shoulder. My eyes were completely dry. Julian picked up the folder, his hands shaking so badly the papers rattled. He looked at the wreckage of his life, turned around, and walked up the stairs to pack his bags. The family was dead. I had killed it. But as I held my son standing in the house I bought, protecting the empire I built, I didn't feel an ounce of regret. I had survived the slaughter. And Julian and Allison? Their nightmare was just beginning, because they still thought they had the $750,000 loan to fall back on. They still thought they had the company. They had no idea the real trap hadn't even been sprung yet. The silence of a large house can either be a prison or a sanctuary. In the weeks following Thanksgiving, my 5-bedroom estate became a fortress of peace. Marcus moved back into his childhood bedroom. He didn't say much at first. The betrayal of a wife is a sharp, agonizing cut, but the betrayal of a father is a deep, bruised ache that settles into your bones. I didn't push him to talk. I just did what mothers do. I kept the house warm, I kept his coffee mug full, and I made sure there was a hot plate of food waiting for him when he came off his police shifts. Slowly, the color returned to his face. The hollow look in his eyes began to fade, replaced by a quiet, hardened resilience. While my son and I were healing, Julian and Allison were discovering that reality is a very cold place when you don't have my checkbook to keep you warm. Because Julian had been formally evicted and my legal team immediately froze our joint personal accounts pending the divorce, he was forced to rent a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in a noisy complex near the highway. Allison, abandoned by her humiliated parents and legally barred from Marcus's townhouse, had no choice but to move in with him. The romance of a forbidden affair dies very quickly when you have to share a single, poorly ventilated bathroom and listen to your neighbors argue through paper-thin walls. I knew all of this because Julian, in his infinite arrogance, was still using the company laptop and the company cell phone. He honestly believed that because I had verbally stepped back from the finances, he was still the undisputed CFO of Fiona's Southern Table. He didn't realize that my IT director had mirrored his devices the day after I found the forged loan application. Every email, every text, every frantic internet search he made was copied directly to a secure server in Arthur Sterling's office. I spent my evenings sitting by the fireplace with a cup of chamomile tea, reading their misery like a cheap paperback novel. Things were getting desperate for them. The bank, spooked by the sudden divorce filing and the freezing of our personal assets, had put a hard hold on the $750,000 home equity line of credit. Julian was sending increasingly angry emails to the loan broker, demanding the funds be released. "I am the managing director of the LLC," Julian wrote in one intercepted email. "The divorce is a personal matter. The commercial assets are perfectly sound. Release the capital immediately." The broker's reply was a polite corporate brick wall. No funds would be dispersed until the divorce litigation clarified the ownership of the commercial kitchen. I read a text exchange between Julian and Allison that truly captured the pathetic nature of their new life. Allison: "The water heater is broken again. I can't take a cold shower, Julian. I'm pregnant. And the baby is kicking." Julian: "I'll call the super. Just boil some water on the stove, Allison. I'm stressed out right now." Allison: "I didn't leave a beautiful townhouse to boil water like a peasant. You promised me we were going to Belize. When are we getting the money?" Julian: The bank is stalling because Fiona's lawyers are aggressive. I'm working on a plan B. Just give me a few days. Plan B. I smiled, taking a sip of my tea. Julian thought he was playing chess, but he was stumbling around a board that I had already flipped over. It was time to introduce him to his savior. His name is Gregory Pierce, Arthur Sterling told me over a secure line the following Tuesday. He is an actor from Chicago, but he looks the part perfectly. Custom Italian suits, Rolex Daytona, the whole 9 yards. We've set up a fake website and a LinkedIn profile showing him as a senior acquisitions director for a massive multi-state hospitality conglomerate. Has he made contact? I asked, looking out my kitchen window at the frost settling on the lawn. Yesterday afternoon, Arthur confirmed. He approached Julian under the guise of an unsolicited corporate buyout. He offered to buy Fiona's Southern Table LLC in its entirety. And the bait? $3.5 million, Arthur said, the amusement evident in his dry voice. Cash, fast close within 30 days, bypassing standard lengthy due diligence by assuming all corporate liabilities. I let out a soft, satisfied laugh. $3.5 million. To a man living in a cheap apartment with a demanding pregnant mistress, that number wasn't just a lifeline. It was a golden chariot descending from the heavens. Through the cloned laptop, I watched Julian take the bait hook, line, and sinker. He didn't question why a massive conglomerate would want to buy the business without speaking to me. His ego was so massive, he truly believed he was the architect of the company's success. He thought the buyers saw him as the key to the empire. He met Gregory Pierce at an upscale steakhouse downtown. I couldn't hear the conversation, but Arthur's private investigator was sitting 2 tables away, taking photographs. Julian looked like a starved dog staring at a raw steak. He leaned across the table, nodding enthusiastically at everything Pierce said. When Julian got back to the apartment, he immediately texted Allison. Julian, pack your bags, baby. Forget the bank loan. I just secured a buyout for the whole company. $3.5 million. We are out of here. But the trap needed a spring, and the spring required Julian to bleed. The next day, Pierce sent Julian a formal letter of intent. The terms were beautifully, ruthlessly crafted by Arthur. The conglomerate would buy the LLC, but there was one strict condition. To expedite the cash sale and bypass the corporate board's red tape, the buyer required a good faith escrow deposit from the seller. It was a standard, though aggressive, corporate maneuver to ensure the seller wouldn't back out during the rapid acquisition process. The required deposit was $250,000. If Julian could wire $250,000 into the escrow account within 5 days, the $3.5 million buyout would be finalized, and the payout would be deposited directly into Julian's corporate account. Panic set in. I watched Julian's search history light up like a Christmas tree. How to liquidate a 401k without spousal consent. Fast personal loans. Bad credit. Can you use a pending corporate buyout as collateral? He had nothing. His personal accounts were frozen by the divorce judge. His credit cards were maxed out paying for his lawyer and the rental apartment. He couldn't go to a traditional bank because he had no liquid assets to his name. He was standing inches away from a multi-million-dollar finish line, and he was completely paralyzed. That night, Allison sent a text to her ex-boyfriend, Devin Vance, the man she was secretly planning to run away with. Allison, Julian got a buyout offer for the catering business, $3.5 million. But he needs $250,000 in cash by Friday to lock it in. If he gets this, we don't have to wait for the stupid bank loan. We take the $3 million and disappear. Devin, $250,000? That's heavy. The old man doesn't have it? Allison, Fiona's lawyers froze him out. He's desperate, Dev. He's talking about giving up. We can't let him give up. Tell your guys to lend it to him. Devin, my guys are hard money. Loan sharks, they take serious collateral. They don't play around. Allison, Julian is the CFO. He can sign over the corporate equipment as collateral. Just give him the cash. Once the $3.5 million hits the offshore account, we pay your guys back, and we keep the rest. I read the exchange, a cold shiver of absolute triumph running down my spine. I hadn't even needed to push them into the fire. Allison was doing it for me. Her greed was a bottomless pit, and she was dragging Julian right to the edge of it. Julian fought the idea at first. Through the cloned phone, I saw the argument play out in their text messages. Julian, are you insane? You want me to borrow $250,000 from street lenders? If Fiona finds out I leveraged the delivery vans and the kitchen equipment to a loan shark, she'll have me thrown in jail. Allison. Julian, you are being weak. The buyer is offering $3.5 million. Who cares what Fiona thinks? By the time she realizes the equipment is leveraged, we will be sitting on a private beach. You just pay the loan shark back on Monday when the buyout clears. It's a bridge loan. It's just business. It took her 2 days to wear him down. Allison used every weapon in her arsenal: tears, the baby, the promise of a wealthy, stress-free future. She fed his ego, telling him he was a brilliant businessman who had to take a calculated risk to secure their destiny. On Thursday afternoon, Julian cracked. He met with a man named Silvio in the back room of a dingy billiards hall in East Atlanta. We knew about the meeting because Arthur's investigator tracked his phone. Julian signed a promissory note for $250,000. The interest rate was a staggering 40%, payable in exactly 14 days. If he defaulted, the lenders had the legal right to seize every single asset listed under Fiona's Southern Table LLC: the delivery vans, the commercial ovens, the refrigerators, the building itself. Julian, blinded by the illusion of his impending millions, signed the paperwork. He walked out of that billiards hall with a cashier's check for $250,000. He immediately drove to his bank and wired the funds into the escrow account provided by Gregory Pierce. "It's done," Julian texted Pierce. "The escrow is secured. Let's close this deal on Monday." "Excellent doing business with you, Julian. See you at the signing," Pierce replied. I was sitting in my kitchen reviewing the finalized menus for a massive Christmas charity gala. Marcus came downstairs, dressed in his police uniform, his duty belt jingling faintly. He poured himself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, watching me. "You look happy, Ma," he said, offering a small, genuine smile. "Business is good?" "Business is spectacular, Marcus," I said, putting my pen down. "In fact, I think we are going to have a very bright holiday season." "Did you hear from Arthur Sterling?" he asked. He knew the broad strokes of my plan. He knew I was stripping Julian of his dignity, though I had spared him the darker, more illicit details of the loan sharks. I didn't want my son, a police officer, compromised by knowing too much about Julian's illegal activities. "I did," I nodded. "The final papers are ready to be signed. On Monday morning we are going to a meeting." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Will he be there? And her?" "They will both be there," I confirmed, looking my son directly in the eyes. "Are you ready to face them?" Marcus took a slow sip of his coffee. He set the mug down, his posture straightening into the rigid, authoritative stance of a man who enforced the law for a living. "I'm ready, Ma. Let's finish this." I smiled. Julian and Allison had spent the last month living in a fantasy world. They thought they had survived the Thanksgiving disaster. They thought they had outsmarted me, secured a multi-million-dollar buyout, and funded their escape. They thought the LLC they had just leveraged to violent loan sharks was a gold mine. They didn't know that the LLC was completely empty. Arthur had executed the transfer weeks ago. Every trademark, every recipe, the brand name itself, it was all legally owned by my new blind trust. Fiona's Southern Table LLC was nothing but a worthless empty shell holding a few depreciating ovens and delivery vans that were now pledged to dangerous criminals. The stage was set. The actors were in position. The trap had snapped shut so tightly it was cutting off their circulation, and they hadn't even felt the pinch yet. Monday morning wasn't going to be a corporate buyout. It was going to be an execution. There is a distinct smell to a high-end corporate boardroom. It smells of lemon polish, expensive leather, and cold, unfiltered power. It is a room designed for people who make decisions that alter lives without ever raising their voices. On Monday morning at 10 o'clock sharp, I walked into the main conference room of Arthur Sterling's law firm. I wore a pristine, ivory-white tailored suit with a silk emerald blouse. My hair was pulled back into a sleek, elegant chignon. I didn't look like a woman who was about to finalize a messy divorce. I looked like a CEO stepping into a corporate slaughterhouse to claim her prize. Marcus walked beside me, dressed in his crisp, dark blue police uniform, his badge gleaming against his chest. His presence wasn't just for emotional support. It was a silent, imposing reminder of exactly who was in charge of this narrative. Arthur Sterling was already seated at the head of the massive mahogany table, organizing a stack of thick legal documents. Sitting across from him, looking like the cat that had just swallowed the canary, were Julian and Allison. Allison had dressed for the occasion. She wore a designer maternity dress she must have bought on credit, clutching a brand new Chanel handbag on her lap. She looked radiant, practically buzzing with the anticipation of becoming a millionaire before lunchtime. Julian sat next to her, wearing his best charcoal suit, trying to project the aura of a titan of industry. When Marcus and I walked through the double-glass doors, the smug smiles on their faces instantly evaporated. Julian shot out of his chair, his face flushing a deep, angry red. "What is she doing here? Arthur, I specifically told you that this buyout meeting was strictly confidential. Fiona has no executive power in the LLC anymore. And Marcus, why are you in uniform?" "Sit down, Julian," Arthur said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the chilling authority of a judge's gavel. "I am the managing director of this company," Julian blustered, though his voice cracked slightly. "The buyer, mister. Pierce is going to be here any minute. I will not have my ex-wife ruining a $3.5 million acquisition because she's bitter." The heavy glass door opened again. Gregory Pierce walked in. He looked every inch the wealthy corporate acquisitions director, wearing a bespoke Italian suit and carrying a slim leather briefcase. "Ah, Mr. Pierce," Julian exhaled, walking forward with his hand outstretched. "I apologize for the interruption. My ex-wife was just leaving." Gregory Pierce didn't take Julian's hand. He didn't even look at him. Instead, he walked right past Julian, pulled out a chair next to me, and offered me a polite, deferential nod. "Good morning, Mrs. Roberts," Gregory said warmly. He looked over at Arthur. "Mr. Sterling, is my part concluded?" "It is, Greg. Your invoice has already been cleared by our accounting department," Arthur replied smoothly. Julian stood frozen in the middle of the room, his outstretched hand slowly dropping to his side. He looked from Gregory to Arthur, and finally to me. His brow furrowed in deep, profound confusion. "What is going on here? Invoice? Mr. Pierce, we have a contract to sign." I took a slow sip from the crystal water glass in front of me. I placed it down on a coaster with deliberate, terrifying precision. "Julian," I said, my voice soft, echoing in the dead silence of the boardroom, "I'd like you to formally meet Gregory Pierce, or rather Greg. He is an exceptionally talented theater actor based out of Chicago. I hired him for a day rate of $300, plus travel expenses." Allison's jaw actually dropped. She gripped her designer handbag so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Actor? What are you talking about?" "He represents the hospitality conglomerate, the $3 million. "There is no conglomerate, Allison," I said, offering her a cold, empty smile. "There is no buyout. No one is paying you $3.5 million. "You're lying!" Julian shouted, slamming his hand down on the mahogany table. "The letter of intent, the escrow. I wired $250,000 into a corporate escrow account on Friday. It's legally binding." Arthur Sterling leaned forward, sliding a single sheet of paper across the table toward Julian. "You did wire $250,000, Julian," Arthur confirmed, his tone dangerously calm. However, during the due diligence phase of this fake acquisition, my office submitted a formal inquiry into the financial health of your LLC. We discovered that you fraudulently attempted to mortgage commercial property using forged signatures. Because of this discovery, the escrow account has been permanently frozen by federal authorities, pending a massive fraud investigation. The blood completely drained from Julian's face. He looked like a man who had just stepped off a cliff and was waiting for gravity to notice him. "Frozen?" Allison whispered, her voice trembling. "What do you mean frozen? Where is the money?" "The money," I explained slowly, relishing every single syllable, "is locked in a federal holding account. You cannot access it. And since you borrowed that money from a man named Silvio at a 40% interest rate, I imagine he is going to be very, very disappointed when you don't pay him back next week." Julian staggered backward, his legs hitting the edge of his leather chair. He collapsed into it, gasping for air as if the room had suddenly been vacuum sealed. "Silvio? How do you know about Silvio?" "I know everything, Julian," I said, the temperature in my voice dropping to absolute zero. "I know about the forged HELOC application on your iPad. I know about the offshore account in the Cayman Islands. And I know that Fiona's Southern Table LLC, the company you just leveraged to violent street lenders, is completely worthless." "That's impossible," Julian croaked, sweat beading on his forehead. "The kitchen, the delivery vans, the brand." "The physical equipment is depreciated junk," Arthur interrupted ruthlessly. "And the brand? The recipes? The vendor contracts? Fiona legally transferred all intellectual property into a private blind trust 3 weeks ago. You are the managing director of an empty shell. You own nothing. You sold nothing. And you leveraged nothing. I watched the exact moment Julian's mind shattered. He realized that not only was he not going to be a millionaire, but he was completely broke, facing federal prison for wire fraud, and owed $250,000 to men who broke kneecaps for a living. When a rat is backed into a corner, it doesn't fight the cat. It eats the other rats. Julian whipped his head around to look at Allison. The look of twisted, romantic adoration he used to give her was completely gone, replaced by a venomous, panicked hatred. "This is your fault," Julian screamed, pointing a trembling finger right in her face. "You made me do this. You set up the offshore account with your ex-boyfriend. You pushed me to go to the loan sharks." Allison shrank back, her doe-eyed facade crumbling into pure, vicious malice. "Me? You're a grown man, Julian. You're the one who forged your wife's signature. You're the one who was stupid enough to fall for a fake buyer. You promised me a beach in Belize, you pathetic old loser." "I am going to prison because of you!" Julian roared, lunging toward her. Marcus stepped forward instantly. He didn't yell. He didn't draw his weapon. He simply placed his large hand firmly on Julian's chest and shoved him backward with enough force to send Julian crashing back into the boardroom chair. "Keep your hands to yourself," Marcus warned, his voice low and lethal. "Marcus, please," Allison sobbed, instantly pivoting, trying to grab my son's arm. The tears flowed like a faucet. "He manipulated me. Julian groomed me. He told me Fiona was abusive. I was scared. I just wanted a good life for our baby." Marcus looked down at the hand grabbing his sleeve. He looked at Allison with an expression of such profound disgust, it made her physically recoil. "Don't ever speak to me again," Marcus said softly. Allison's face twisted. The sweet, innocent daughter-in-law completely vanished, leaving behind the greedy, desperate grifter I always knew she was. "You think you're so smart, Julian?" Allison spat, reaching into her designer bag and pulling out her cell phone. "You think you can pin this all on me to save your own skin? I'm not going down for your forgery." She unlocked her phone, navigated to her voice memos, and slammed the phone down on the mahogany table. "I had to forge a secondary verification document she supposedly missed, but it went through." Julian's recorded voice played loudly in the silent room. $750,000, Allison. Tax-free, untraceable once it hits the Caymans." Julian stared at the phone in absolute horror. You recorded me?" "I always record everything, Julian," Allison sneered. "Insurance, and I'm handing this straight to the district attorney." "You won't have to go far to do that," a new voice said. The double glass doors swung open. 2 plainclothes detectives, colleagues of Marcus from the Financial Crimes Division, walked into the room. They didn't look amused. "Julian Roberts," the lead detective said, pulling a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, forgery, and grand larceny. Stand up and put your hands behind your back." Julian burst into loud, ugly, heaving sobs. He looked at me, his face wet with tears and snot, completely stripped of his dignity. Julie, please. 30 years, tell them to stop. I'll do anything." I didn't blink. I didn't move. I just watched him. "You're not my problem anymore, Julian," I said coldly. "Enjoy the consequences." The detective pulled Julian's arms behind his back and clicked the cuffs into place. Allison let out a breath of relief, stepping away from Julian. "Thank God. Officer, I have all the audio evidence on my phone. I am fully willing to cooperate." "Save it for the judge, Ms. Washington," the second detective said, grabbing Allison by the arm. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud and accessory to grand larceny. Oh, and your associate, Devin Vance? We picked him up an hour ago trying to board a flight to Miami. He's already talking." Allison's eyes rolled to the back of her head, and her knees gave out. If the detective hadn't been holding her arm, she would have collapsed onto the floor. "Marcus!" Allison screamed hysterically as they dragged her toward the door. "Marcus, help me! Our baby! Your father's baby! You can't let them do this!" Marcus stood perfectly still, his hands clasped behind his back, watching the woman who had shattered his heart get pulled out of the room. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The heavy glass doors closed behind them. The screaming faded down the carpeted hallway until there was nothing left but absolute silence. Arthur Sterling let out a long breath, neatly stacking the files on his desk. "Well, that went exactly according to schedule." I looked at my son. "Are you all right, Marcus?" Marcus turned to me. The heavy, dark cloud that had been hanging over him since Thanksgiving was gone. He looked lighter. He looked free. "I'm good, Ma," Marcus said, offering me a real, genuine smile. "I'm really good. Let's go home." They say that when a forest burns to the ground, the soil becomes incredibly fertile. The ashes of the old dead trees provide the exact nutrients needed for new life to grow stronger, taller, and greener than before. It has been 3 months since that morning in Arthur Sterling's office. Julian is currently sitting in a federal holding facility, awaiting trial. The loan sharks, realizing they couldn't seize my catering equipment, turned their attention fully to him. His court-appointed lawyer is trying to get him placed in protective custody because of the threats he's receiving from the outside. He has absolutely nothing. No money, no family, no dignity. Allison took a plea deal. She turned state's evidence against Julian and Devin Vance to avoid a lengthy prison sentence. She was given 5 years of strict probation, hundreds of hours of community service, and a felony record that ensures she will never work in a medical clinic or any reputable office again. She is currently living in a cramped trailer with her parents, who refuse to speak to her in public. And me? It was a Sunday afternoon in late March. The Georgia heat was just starting to settle in, wrapping the air in a comfortable, humid blanket. I was sitting on the wide, wraparound porch of my 5-bedroom estate. I was wearing a comfortable linen dress, the breeze gently swaying the hanging ferns around me. In my hand was an ice-cold glass of sweet peach tea, the condensation dripping down the sides of the crystal glass. From the backyard, I could smell the rich, smoky scent of barbecue. Marcus was out there, manning the grill. He had invited a few of his friends from the police precinct over for a Sunday cookout. I could hear his booming, joyful laugh echoing across the manicured lawn. He was healing. He had started dating a lovely, intelligent woman who worked as a pediatric nurse, and for the first time in a long time, my son looked truly at peace. Fiona's southern table was busier than ever. With the dead weight of Julian removed from the payroll, I had expanded our operations, hiring a brilliant young manager to handle the finances so I could focus entirely on the culinary side. My legacy was secure. My empire was untouched. I took a sip of my sweet tea, leaning back in my wicker chair, looking out at the beautiful, quiet neighborhood I had earned with my own 2 hands. They thought they could break me. They thought because I was an older woman, because I loved fiercely and worked quietly, that I was weak. They mistook my kindness for stupidity. But a queen doesn't have to roar to let you know she rules the jungle. She just has to wait for you to step into her territory. I closed my eyes, listening to the sound of my son laughing in the backyard, and I smiled. The tea had never tasted so sweet.